All right, thanks so much for joining us today. We are talking about secrets to a great virtual interview. My name is Lauren. I'm a career coach with Kelley, Indianapolis Career Services, and I'm joined here with Hannah Brown and Luke Keeper. They're both our Kelley career peers. So they will be manning our chat and also popping into our conversation here today. So what we're going to be looking at is how to be successful in the virtual interview and do some general how to prepare to be successful with interviews. In particular, we're going to look into some kind of the psychology of our language choice and the body language that we're sending out, which can affect the way people view you. So we've got a lot to cover. We're going to go ahead and get started. I do want to invite you to use the Q&A or the chat box, since the career peers will be monitoring them. But what we're going to look for today is the idea of what is an employer actually looking for when they're interviewing. And there's ultimately three things. They're looking for the fit between you and the company. They're assessing the competencies on what you have listed on your resume or in your cover letter. Is it really matching up with the needs of the company? And then, of course, it's also to look at your past experiences and how they might influence the future work that you do. So all about this is talking about if you can speak intelligently to your past experiences and then relate them to the company needs. So we'll look at that a little bit later. But first, what we're going to cover is virtual interviewing and how you can be successful in meeting those different expectations of companies and navigating the various softwares that are out there. And virtual interviewing happens in two different capacities. So there is what is live interviewing. This is one that we are all very familiar with. It happens when you get a link sent to you and it's a video meeting. There's a person or a group of people waiting to talk to you. It's just conducted like an in-person interview with a series of questions or maybe scenarios that you might be answering. But something new that's appearing and is becoming and gaining more popularity is what we call on-demand video interviewing. And on-demand video interviewing is where you actually pre-record your responses to questions that are being posed by the committee, but no one's actually watching you or asking any follow-up questions. So it's always best practice when you're getting a virtual interview that you distinguish whether or not it will be live or on demand, because that will change the way that you prepare, but also the way that you prepare for the technology component of it. Now, what happens on an on-demand interview is that a recruiter will actually be evaluating the different answers that you have after you've recorded them. So it is a little bit different, a little more awkward because you're actually not talking in person. And so it's a good idea to kind of practice some potential questions that you might get. And I'll show you how we'll start that a little later. Now, on-demand, different video interviewing platforms vary, but the two most popular are called HireVue or Spark Hire. And essentially, again, what happens is a question pops up on the screen, you have time to answer it, and then it goes on to a next question. Now, of course, live platforms, there's probably way more than I'm even listing here, but Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, Skype are some of the most popular ones. What's interesting though is if companies typically are going to be conducting these interviews in a way that's going to be on a platform that everyone can access. So typically you're not going to see anything on FaceTime since not everyone owns an Apple product. But the other component to this is to make sure that you're testing all of this equipment as it comes out. Now, when you're doing an on-demand interview, definitely pay attention to the deadlines that are needed to complete an interview, because you're usually given multiple days or even a week to complete this. And it does have specific directions in it on how you test your equipment and a contact at the company if you're experiencing trouble with their platform. Now, just another note, an employer is never going to ask you to complete an interview via text. This is often a sign of a scam. So if you do have that experience, it is a good idea to end the conversation, and you can always bring that to the attention of our office as well. So the biggest change really between in-person and virtual interviewing is how you prepare to handle the technology. So don't hesitate to reach out to the HR recruiter throughout this process. They're there to help you. And right now we're going to look at some best practices on how to utilize the technology and also things that you want to consider when you're preparing to get ready for an interview. So I already alluded to this one. You want to make sure you're talking to HR about the interview, whether it's live or going to be on demand, but also what software they're utilizing. For most of us, it's a good idea as well to ask if they have a backup. So if they have a phone number in case technology does fail. Also, if it's a live session, who's going to be part of it, so that way you have time to research. These are all great and acceptable questions to be asking someone in HR. Now, I do recommend with technology that you're utilizing a laptop versus a phone. This eliminates the need for you to hold something or figure out how to prop it up. And if you are using a laptop, kind of like I'm using today, I've got it stacked up on books, so that way we have a direct way of looking at each other, and I'm not looking down at you or trying to look up at you. It's more of a natural conversation. Now, of course, your outfit is going to be just like an interview, right? I encourage you to wear a full pantsuit, and yes, pants are included. I want you to think about yourself like you are setting, like a movie director almost. You're setting up a stage for how you want to be viewed, and that includes the outfit that you choose, the background that you have. First impressions really do count. So do an environmental scan. What's going on in your background? Do you have piles of laundry on the floor? Is there an unmade bed? What kind of signals do you think these are sending to the interviewers? And if it looks like it's a messy background, it could have a negative view on you. Now, other things to consider, light really should be in front of you, so that way it's projecting on you versus being behind you and creating a shadow. If you have windows, close those if they're behind you, so that way you don't have any issue with it. Now, I talked a little bit about having the full suit, and the reason that I suggest this is because it gets you into the mindset that you're actually going in and doing an interview. Oftentimes we're at home, so it doesn't feel quite as real. If we start to put ourselves like we were going into the office, including putting on the full outfit, this really gets you into a better mindset, and you're a much stronger candidate then. Now, notify any family and roommates that you are doing an interview, live or recorded. That way, there's going to be limited disruptions. Does it mean everything is going to be limited? No, but it does ensure that we are all on the same page and no one's surprised. Now, as you can see behind me, I am letting you into my living room, so welcome. But I do encourage you to actually show your room. What's been conducted in a few studies is that people benefit from seeing you in the room, and they actually see you as a more authentic person. So the psychology behind this is that we are not trying to put up a smoke screen. We're not trying to be someone we're not. This actually gives them a view into who we are. Now, 65% of people who participated in this study said that people would be more authentic, but even more, 73% actually said that you would be more trustworthy because you can actually see an environment. And I thought this was interesting. About half of those who were surveyed said that you would look more like an expert because of this in your background, that you're more willing to be open to people. So take the extra mile, clean up that your room behind you, straighten the bookshelves, level any paintings that you might have up. That way things look as good as they can. Now, continuing on this whole psychology mindset here, the clothes and the color choice that you have makes a big difference. So natural colors will make you appear more authentic and trustworthy and more like an expert. Again, about 56% of people who participated in this study said that white, beige, gray, brown, and khaki, also navy, made you appear more trustworthy, seen as an expert, versus only 30% who said bright colors do the same thing. So Hannah's going to put a link in the chat box so you can read up more on this study. It was published with the Harvard Business Review about dressing for the remote job you want, but it also, of course, comes into play when we're talking about interviewing. Of course, we have to think about the technology as much as possible, get that software downloaded ahead of time and test things out. I actually hardwire into my router every time that I do some kind of a workshop or a meeting with someone. So that way it eliminates the Wi-Fi connectivity, especially if it happens to be poor that particular day. If you're on a laptop, make sure it's fully charged. And what's actually the most important is turn off all of your notifications and distractions. So that's something that I do every time I'm meeting with someone. I close everything that could be popping up, including email notifications, or maybe you have texts that appear on your laptop. Close all of that, so therefore you're not tempted to look at it, but it's also not taking away from your thoughts there with the committee. So there's also this idea of we may need to have something available or bring something to a digital interview. And the things actually are almost exactly identical to what you would bring to an in-person interview. So have a copy of your resume available. Maybe that's on your desktop, then in case you need to quickly share that, you have the ability to do that. Having a notepad and a pen, hey, guess what? I have mine right here. Any questions that I need to write down or thoughts, I can do that. It's right in front of me. And of course, the questions that you'll need to have prepared for the employer. I'll discuss that just a little bit later. No problem though with taking notes during the meeting. I think that makes you, it does make you appear more authentic and excited and engaged about the potential opportunity. So let's change gears a little bit from technology to actually the preparation for a virtual interview. And thankfully, not much changes between how you prep for in-person versus a virtual interview. Company research still plays a huge role in this, and it goes a long way. When you know the company, the person that's interviewing you, you're able to make a lot more personal connections and ask these relevant questions, and also provide examples that actually speak to the employer's needs. So there's a level of preparation that helps you with this. So what we're going to look at when you're actually doing interview or you're prepping and researching a company is to get to know the person. So look at them up on LinkedIn, get to know the company's clients, what their mission, vision, or values are. Consider how those match with your own, especially when you get a question about tell me about yourself or why you want this job. You're going to be able to make those connections very clearly. Now, some companies, a lot of companies, are in the news very frequently. So set some Google alerts and see how other people are talking about the company, not just how the company is portraying themselves. And you can also look on their website too to kind of see the different skills and experiences the company values. So part of this comes from looking at the job description and kind of reading in between the lines. So when you look at the employer's requests of what kind of skills that you need, you can actually start preparing some questions. And not only that, but also preparing examples that will help you appear as the best candidate. You can also look at the different projects and initiatives too that the company is currently working on. So your research just doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's not just for you for some, for a trivia night. This is actually information you're going to use. So this is how you can prepare questions. From that research, you're going to start to understand a little bit more about maybe how a company works with different clients, but you may have questions on something more specifically about how that role interacts with people or interacts with different missions and goals of the company. So those are good questions. You might ask about other people's experiences. So how have they enjoyed their time there? What kind of opportunities have they been given to develop themselves professionally? Of course, other things that you can ask, especially some that are more relevant, but about how their company has been reacting to the COVID-19 crisis. What is that looking like for them, and how has that impacted how they operate and how this company might, proceed in the future? So it's a lot to think about. There's so many different questions you could ask, but this formula can be helpful when you're actually developing a question. Start by telling them what you know and why you care about that information, and then ask them to tell you more about a particular topic. So as an example, I recently read that your company is increasing some philanthropic contributions, and I've always been really passionate about giving back to the community. Can you tell me more about this initiative? So it covers every aspect, and it's kind of a little checklist for you to include there. Now, Luke is going to share a link in the description or in the chat box. There's 51 great questions to ask in an interview. This might give you some additional ideas, but remember, the more personal and the more research the questions are, the better are they, are better off and you are in an interview, because you're actually getting questions that you are excited to get answered. Now, the other thing we can do to prepare for an interview is actually anticipate the type of questions that we may get from an employer. And a lot of people wonder, well, how can I anticipate when I'm not even sure what they're going to ask? Well, I've got a couple of ideas for you on how you're going to do that when we actually look and analyze the job description. But there are two questions that you can almost always guarantee you will get. The first one is, tell me about yourself. And the second one is, why are you interested in this position? This is all about a way to introduce who you are and your story and really what brings you to this organization, what has excited you about it. So your research is going to help answer the second question, why you're interested in the position. But at the same time, tell me about yourself. Your research is going to help you be able to connect the reasons why you are here and what skills that you bring to help the company. So there's a lot of interconnection between the research that you're doing. Now in the chat box, I think it's Luke or Hannah, I can't remember, you're going to include a chat about some common interview questions on how you might answer them. This is also another idea that Glassdoor has some potential questions that you can ask during interviews too. So Glassdoor will give you an insight as to what kinds of questions a company may ask. Now, the other sector we're going to talk about is what is called behavioral-based interviewing. And this is where we can start talking about some anticipation of potential questions here. So when you prepare for what a behavioral-based interview question, let me kind of set the example. A behavioral-based interview question starts with, can you tell me about a time when, or how have you handled a situation? It essentially wants you to draw on your past experience so that an employer can see how you might react in the future at their company. And the formula that we follow in order to answer this question is to use the STAR method. And STAR stands for situation, where you're actually going to give an example of a particular time you've experienced something, and then tell what the task was that you had to accomplish. And then the last component is all about the action steps that you took. Consider what your process might have been for approaching the issue. And then finally, what the result was of you doing all of this work. What was the impact of your task and project on the organization? And this is actually the piece that most people leave out. So I encourage you to think about the result as the way that you're kind of putting closure to whatever situation that you have provided as an example. And Hannah's going to send in the chat here a flyer for our interview steps and tips, which will have the situation, action, task, and result all listed in there with a couple of examples too that you can look at. So the question comes down to, well, how do you actually anticipate these questions? Well, the job description itself is a giant cheat sheet, and it tells you exactly what the organization wants, and you can start anticipating questions based on that. So let me give you an example. This is a job description for an accounting, or I'm sorry, for a project management position. And this is where we're talking about they're meeting with clients to provide these detailed briefs and the requirements for each project. So this is what is part of the job that you might be doing. And so you can start to already say, oh, I can see some questions that can come up from that. And some of those potential questions could be, tell me about a time when you've worked with a client. How did you meet their needs? It could even get more specific as to, tell us about a time you met with a challenging client and you had to figure out how to meet needs that you couldn't. So what did that look like? All of these are kind of aimed at more of like a customer service, but for each one of the tasks, you can start to think about examples and also some potential questions and spins on those questions that an employer might ask. And so when we're thinking about looking at the job description, ultimately what's really helpful is to start brainstorming projects that match with the task that you might have to do. So that way you can utilize these in a way that helps describe your experience as it relates to the company needs. Now, other questions might appear during an interview, as they always do, but in particular, companies are now focusing a lot on, are you able to be agile and ready for change? We are certainly in a time that that is a high priority for companies. Someone who can learn fast, and also this new one, being able to work from home effectively. You may get questions related to that. And I encourage you to think about the second 8 weeks of the spring semester that just happened. So when we all went remote, that is a great example where you might be able to share this idea of working from home, because we all had to switch and adapt very quickly. The idea of being able to learn fast can also apply to when you've had to learn new technologies, and how that you maybe needed to be brought up on, to speed much faster. So these are all examples that can be class related as much as they can be professional related when we're talking about our ability to adapt and especially work from home. Now I'm going to bring in our Kelley career peers to talk a little bit about some of their tips for answering questions. And Luke, I'll have you come up first. What have you found was really helpful when you were preparing for answering questions during an interview?
I would say knowing my resume is probably the most helpful tip for me. You don't want to necessarily be looking at your resume while you're answering a question. You kind of want to know what you've done. And it seems like a very simple thing of just knowing your resume. Obviously, you know what you've done, but sometimes you can kind of get lost in the fray and kind of forget what you've done. So it's good to kind of review that thing and make sure that you're not, like for example, if I were on an interview, you don't want to be speaking at the camera and then have to look away often at your resume. So it's just good to know your resume and be able to make that eye contact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an excellent point. There's something that is said about confidence, right? When you can actually speak to your experiences without kind of stumbling or forgetting. Awesome. Hannah, what about you? Same question. What have you found helpful when you're preparing for an interview, when you're answering different employers' questions?
Yeah, so I think the thing that I have found the most helpful when answering questions is to take time to think about your answer. It is totally okay to tell the person who's interviewing you that that's a great question. I need a minute to think about that, so that you can collect your thoughts before you start just spilling everything that comes to your mind. It allows you to form a good answer that they're going to be impressed by.
Absolutely. That is such a great point. And I think it's really important for us to think about that, especially if we're an extrovert, where our natural tendency is to fill any kind of silence with some kind of conversation. And that's not always the case. In fact, some of the best people that I've ever hired have been those who took their time to respond and really think about the question. Thank you, guys. That's awesome. All righty. So one thing that we're going to look at next, and sorry about that, technical difficulty there. We're going to talk about positive body language and how you can make these genuine connections. So a stat that's kind of interesting is 93% of daily communication is all nonverbal. So it's all about how people are perceiving our facial features, how sitting up straight might make a difference versus someone who's over slouching. That's what is going to make a big difference, especially when you're interviewing and you have that capacity to see somebody. It's certainly a loss for us to not have a physical connection, being able to go and see someone's workplace and maybe have these side conversations that actually come with an in-person interview, but that doesn't have to stop you from having a strong interview. So let's look at some ways you can show likability in your language choice and also how you're actually visually displaying your body. So for example, body posture, I already mentioned this, right? Sitting up straight, so that way you're not slouching or looking out here and trying to be distracted by things. That posture makes a difference because it does portray that you're friendly and open and you're ready to talk. I talk about chair choice very frequently because oftentimes we have a nice office chair and we're wiggling around in it. Make sure that you've got your feet on the floor if you're in a chair that swivels, so that way you are not distracted and also not distracting the other people around you too who are in the interview. Now, if you are someone who is a nervous person, maybe you twirl your hair, you tap your foot, know that nervousness does diminish that appearance of confidence, even if the fidgeting is not related to that. It's how people are perceiving it. And so you don't want to look stressed or very distracted if you can help it. So sometimes what I like to do, I have a pen, I hold on to it, and that's something that keeps my hands busy while I am just presenting as an example. So find ways that help you as you're going through this process. Of course, making eye contact with your interviews is really important. Shifty eyes is kind of an interesting one because some of us have multiple screens. I'm definitely a culprit of this. So I'll have a screen over here and I've also got a screen here. When I'm in an interview, shut those off. So that way you are just looking directly at the camera, and therefore it makes a more natural conversation, and you're not looking around like they're not sure what you're seeing. Make sure you smile too. That sounds like a really simple thing, but people who smile are much more friendly. They're showing that they're excited to be here. And that's a piece of body language that a lot of us can convey very easily. Now, when I'm talking about mirroring body language, this is probably more important for a live interview. And this is what we call the chameleon effect. And essentially, we are mirroring different body language, speech habits, or even repeating particular phrases that people are using, or even hand gestures. And it's a way to show that I understand you, you understand me, and we're building rapport. And people like other people who have those similar qualities. So this is another way we can have that psychology of a strong connection with people. Now, also some of this comes down to language choice, showing confidence in the language that we use. So a few things, sloppy speech habits is what I like to call them. Non-words are the uhs, and likes that we have to make sure that we're not utilizing as frequently. Up talk is an important one. This is where you actually end every sentence like you're asking a question, even though it's a statement, and it doesn't show confidence. So you can hear the difference in the way that I've utilized that. Speed talking is another one where people can't understand you because you're just going way too fast. So take a second, breathe in between each one of your sentences you're forming. So that way it comes off more naturally and people can understand. Weak speak is another one to be careful of. This is where I might use a phrase like, well, I hopefully think that answered your question, or this perhaps might be what you're looking for. Instead, you want to show confidence, and it's in phrases like, I'm really confident that this experience matches what you need, or my track record shows this. It's much more confidence. There's a lot of conviction that's behind that. Luke is going to share in the chat some other sloppy speech habits to look for as well as you are going through and interviewing. Now, of course, practice all of this before you go and do it. And what we're going to have in the chat box, Hannah is going to include a service that we utilize called Interview Stream. And this is where you can actually pre-record yourself answering questions. And there are different interview sets for every major, including our MBA students in there. So please take a look at that. All of those accounts are free for you to utilize, and a great resource. You can, interview with yourself at midnight tonight and not have to wait for a mock interview with someone from the office. Now, of course, post-interview, make sure you're sending follow-up emails that say thank you. We're really excited for the time. This is still a waiting game though, so continue to apply for positions and seek out additional opportunities. Just because you've had an interview does not mean an offer is coming down the pipeline. You have to wait to see what their next steps are. And of course, you're welcome to follow up for feedback too, once you have determined whether or not you're moving forward or not in the process. Some employers will provide that information for you. Whew, we covered a lot today. So this is 30 minutes. If you have questions, Luke, Hannah, and I will hang out here for another couple of minutes to answer those. You're also welcome to email the kicks@iupui.edu email address for any questions, and we will get those answered. Thank you so much for attending today. We really appreciate you staying here and getting all of your questions to the team here.